All right, diving in again. This time, it's David R. Hawkins' Letting Go. You guys sent in tons of excerpts,
Says,
and we're ready to dig in. This book, basically, it's a guide to understanding and then, like, releasing all that negative stuff, or all those emotions that weigh us down so we can experience more peace, more fulfillment. We're talking about a map of consciousness, how letting go can actually help you reach those goals you've been working towards, and even how all those suppressed emotions could be, like, showing up in your physical health. Pretty intense stuff, right?
it is. And what I find really interesting about Hawkins' approach, he goes beyond those typical self-help things you hear all the time. Like, he actually gives us a structured framework. Think of it like a map for your inner world, your emotions.
Okay, so like a roadmap to our feelings. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this map of consciousness thing.
Yeah.
It ranks emotions on a scale, right? Like a power scale. Apathy down at the bottom, enlightenment at the top. Mind-blowing, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
But how does this actually work in our lives?
Well, picture it like a ladder. Each emotion, it's got a different frequency, a different energy. Some are way more empowering than others. So like courage that vibrates higher than fear because it helps us overcome obstacles,
Yeah.
And even higher than that is acceptance. Acceptance leads to peace. So think about it. Where do you usually sit on this map? What emotions maybe are holding you back from climbing higher?
That's a really cool way to think about it. Understanding this map could totally help us become more aware of those emotional patterns we get stuck in and then choose to move toward those higher states, the ones that give us more power. But how do we actually like let go of all that negativity that feels so stuck so deep inside? Sometimes it feels like it's just part of who we are?
Right, and that's where Hawkins' idea of the anatomy of emotions comes in. He says emotions are often driven by these underlying beliefs that we might not even realize are there. Like, remember that story about the guy who lost his passport right before this big trip? Yeah. So he's freaking out, convinced he's been careless, but when he uses Hawkins' letting go technique, the emotion that surfaces, it wasn't anxiety about the trip. It was grief.
Grief over a lost passport. I'm not sure I follow.
It turned out he was like subconsciously grieving a recent separation and the fear of being even more separated because of this trip. It manifested as the lost passport. And get this, as soon as he acknowledges and releases that grief, bam, he remembers exactly where he put the passport. It was right there in plain sight the whole time.
Whoa, that's wild. So it's not about like ignoring or suppressing those negative feelings. It's more about figuring out where they're coming from and then like actually letting them go.
Exactly. Hawkins breaks it down like this. Acknowledge the emotion, accept it without judging it, and then surrender it. He uses this really powerful analogy, a bucket of crabs.
Crabs. What do crabs have to do with letting go?
Think about it. When one crab tries to climb out, what happens? The others pull it back down.
Oh, right, right.
Same thing with negativity. All the bad vibes out there in the world, even the negativity we hold inside ourselves, that it can keep us from reaching our potential, from becoming who we're meant to be.
So letting go is like that one crab finally breaking free, finally escaping all those other crabs trying to pull it back in.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. Hawkins says that surrender, the act of letting go, can actually help you achieve your goals. I know. It sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Wait, so you're saying that if you like detach from something you want, it can actually help you get it? How does that even work? Isn't that like giving up?
Not really. It's more about shifting from, like, desperation in forcing things to a place of allowance and trust. It doesn't mean you become passive. It's about choosing a more positive approach, a more empowered way of going after what you want. So imagine you set a goal like finding the perfect apartment in New York City. Instead of being super attached to that desire, what if you just let go of needing it so badly? Trust that the universe has your back.
You mean like loosening our grip on the outcome and trusting the process. So things actually have a better chance of happening naturally when we do that.
Exactly. There's this story in the book about a guy, he's unemployed, super stressed about finding a job. He decides to use that letting go technique, releases all that attachment to finding a job, and bam! The next day, his brother-in-law calls him out of the blue, offers him this perfect position.
Okay, that's kind of amazing. So letting go, it doesn't mean we just sit around and do nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's more like aligning our energy with what we want, trusting in something bigger than ourselves, and then taking action when it feels right.
Exactly. But letting go, it goes beyond just goals. Hawkins applies it to all sorts of things in life. Healing old wounds, overcoming fears, creating deeper relationships, even improving your physical health. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more about how this letting go thing applies to those other areas.
Well, let's start with relationships. I mean, they can be amazing, right? But they can also bring up a lot of, well, baggage,
Oh, yeah, tell me about it.
right? We've all been there. Hawkins, he really digs into those negative emotions that tend to pop up in relationships. Things like apathy, grief, fear, even pride.
Oh, I know those all too well.
I
I
know.
definitely experienced my fair share of relationship drama.
Yeah, and Hawkins explains how those emotions can lead to, like, misunderstandings, conflicts, even feeling disconnected from the people we care about most. For example, he talks about how apathy, that emotional withdrawal, it might seem like a way to protect ourselves, but it often just creates more distance and resentment.
It's like pushing your partner away instead of dealing with the issue.
Exactly. And then there's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, even fear of intimacy itself. These fears, they can lead us to sabotage relationships, pushing away the very people we want to be close to.
It's like we build up these walls around our hearts to protect ourselves from getting hurt again.
That's a great way to put it. But Hawkins, he encourages us to really examine these fears, understand where they're coming from, and ultimately let them go. He suggests that by releasing that need to control or protect ourselves all the time, we open ourselves up to the possibility of like really deep intimacy and connection.
So it's about taking that leap of faith and trusting that we're worthy of love and belonging, even if we've been hurt in the past.
Exactly. And then there's pride. We might try to impress our partners, always looking for their admiration, or we become super critical and judgmental, trying to control them. And these behaviors, they often come from insecurity and a lack of self-acceptance.
So we're basically projecting our own insecurities onto our partners, hoping they'll magically fix us.
You got it. Hawkins encourages us to let go of that need for external validation and instead focus on like cultivating our own self-worth.
Right.
He suggests that when we genuinely love and accept ourselves, flaws and all, we can then extend that same love and acceptance to our partners.
So instead of trying to change our partners, we focus on changing ourselves, right? Changing the way we approach the relationship.
Exactly. And while those negative emotions can really mess things up, Hawkins also highlights the amazing power of positive emotions. He talks about how qualities like courage, willingness, and confidence, they can create a ripple effect, inspiring our partners and fostering a more loving and supportive dynamic.
So by working on ourselves and bringing those positive emotions to the table, we can actually improve our relationships. Kind of like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Precisely. And of course, communication is key in any relationship. Hawkins emphasizes the importance of expressing our needs and desires, being clear and honest, while also really listening to our partner's perspective. It's about creating that safe space where both partners feel comfortable sharing what's going on inside.
It sounds like a recipe for deeper understanding and connection.
Exactly. And when conflicts do arise, Hawkins suggests using the letting go technique to release those old patterns of resentment and create a space for greater harmony. He also encourages us to let go of our expectations of our partners, recognizing that they're on their own journeys and can't always fulfill all our needs.
So it's about accepting our partners as they are, flaws and all, while still working toward a healthy and fulfilling relationship.
Exactly. Hawkins even touches on the role of sexuality in relationships, suggesting that our sexual experiences often reflect our overall level of consciousness. As we let go of fear, shame, and those limiting beliefs, our sexual energy becomes more free-flowing and expressive, leading to greater pleasure and intimacy.
That makes sense. Our emotional and mental state definitely impacts our physical experiences.
Precisely. But speaking of physical experiences, Hawkins goes beyond just relationships and delves into the mind-body connection, particularly how our thoughts, beliefs, and emotions can manifest as physical symptoms. Remember how I mentioned kinesiology earlier?
Right. You said it was a way of tapping into the body's wisdom through muscle testing.
Exactly. It's based on the idea that our muscles respond to our thoughts and emotions. So by testing muscle strength, we can actually uncover subconscious beliefs and emotional patterns that might be contributing to physical ailments.
So you're saying our unexpressed emotions can literally get stuck in our bodies.
Exactly. Hawkins shares several stories of people who experienced incredible healings after releasing long-held emotional baggage. There's one about a woman who had chronic respiratory problems for years, asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, and nothing seemed to work, despite all the treatment she tried. Through therapy, she discovered these physical symptoms were actually linked to unresolved grief over the death of her mother 22 years earlier. She'd been denying her feelings of sadness and guilt, and it manifested as breathing problems.
Wow, that's powerful. So her body was literally crying out for her to acknowledge and release that pain.
Precisely. And it's not just grief. Hawkins talks about how suppressed anger, fear, and resentment can contribute to all sorts of physical issues.
So it's not about dismissing traditional medicine, but recognizing that our emotional and mental health play a huge role in our overall well-being.
Exactly. And speaking of emotional well-being, Hawkins dives into the concept of forgiveness. And it's not just about forgiving others, it's also about forgiving ourselves.
Forgiveness can be tough, especially when we've been really hurt. It's something I think a lot of people struggle with.
It's true. But Hawkins explains that forgiveness is not about condoning harmful actions. It's about releasing ourselves from that grip of resentment and bitterness. Remember that analogy about drinking poison and expecting the other person to die?
Yeah, that one really hit home.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? Forgiveness is ultimately an act of self-love. By releasing those negative emotions we've been carrying around, we free ourselves from the burden of pain and resentment. And like I said, it's not just about forgiving others, it's also about forgiving ourselves.
I think a lot of us are way harder on ourselves than we'd ever be on anyone else.
Absolutely. We make mistakes, we have regrets, and it's easy to get caught up in self-blame and guilt. But Hawkins encourages us to extend the same compassion and forgiveness to ourselves that we would offer to others.
That's a great reminder. We're all works in progress, right? And every experience, even the tough ones, offers an opportunity for learning and growth.
Exactly. Now, remember how you were intrigued by that concept of owning the shadow?
Yes, it sounded kind of mysterious, maybe even a little scary.
It can be, but it's also incredibly liberating. Hawkins is drawing on the work of Carl Jung here. Jung referred to the shadow as the part of ourselves that we tend to repress or deny, those aspects of our personality that we deem unacceptable or undesirable.
It's like the stuff we try to hide from others and even from ourselves.
Exactly. But Hawkins argues that we can't truly heal and become whole until we acknowledge and integrate those shadow aspects.
So it's not about getting rid of the shadow, but more about accepting it as part of who we are.
Precisely. And by bringing those shadow aspects into the light of consciousness, they lose their power over us.
It's like facing our fears. The more we avoid them, the bigger and scarier they become. But when we confront them head on, we often realize they're not as terrifying as we thought.
That's a great analogy. Hawkins encourages us to examine those parts of ourselves that we tend to judge or reject. By acknowledging them, we can begin to accept ourselves more fully, flaws and all. And that creates a more authentic and integrated sense of self.
Sounds like a journey of self-discovery and acceptance. But how do we actually go about owning our shadow?
Well, Hawkins suggests a few practical approaches. We can start by simply becoming aware of our judgments and criticisms of others. Often, the qualities we judge most harshly in others are the very ones we've disowned in ourselves. It's like a mirror, reflecting back to us those parts of ourselves we've rejected or denied.
So by paying attention to how we react to others, we can learn a lot about ourselves.
Exactly. Hawkins also encourages us to pay attention to our dreams. Dreams can be like a portal into the unconscious, offering symbolic representations of our fears, desires, and unresolved conflicts.
I've always been fascinated by dreams, but I never thought of them as a way to explore my shadow side.
They can be incredibly insightful. And don't underestimate the power of creative expression. Doing things like writing, painting, or dancing can be a powerful way to express and release those shadow emotions.
So it's about finding healthy outlets for those emotions that we might not feel comfortable expressing directly.
Precisely. Now, I know this can all sound a bit intense. Working with the shadow can be challenging and uncomfortable at times. But Hawkins assures us that the rewards are worth the effort. By integrating our shadow selves, we become more whole, authentic, and compassionate individuals.
So it's not about becoming perfect or getting rid of our flaws, but rather embracing our wholeness, both the light and the shadow.
Exactly. And by doing so, we create a more authentic and integrated sense of self. This is also fascinating. Hawkins seems to blend ideas from psychology, spirituality, even physics, to create this incredibly rich understanding of human consciousness. He really does. One concept that really stands out is his discussion of different levels of consciousness. He proposes that human consciousness exists on a spectrum, from lower states of fear, anger, and shame, to higher states of love, joy, and peace. And get this, he suggests that we can actually measure these levels using a technique called muscle testing, which we talked about earlier.
So it's like each level of consciousness has its own energy frequency, and we can actually detect that through muscle testing.
Exactly. It's a fascinating concept that challenges our traditional understanding of how consciousness works. Hawkins provides this detailed map of these levels, calibrating everything from individual emotions to historical figures and spiritual teachings.
It's mind-blowing, this whole exploration of the energetic nature of reality.
It really is. And while some people might find this concept a little out there, Hawkins presents a really compelling case, based on years of research and observation.
It makes you wonder what else is possible when it comes to understanding the nature of reality.
Exactly. And amidst all these different concepts, one thing that really shines through is Hawkins's emphasis on the transformative power of love.
It seems like love is really at the core of his teachings.
It truly is. He suggests that love isn't just a fleeting emotion. It's the fundamental energy of the universe. It's the force that connects us all, the source of all creation, and the key to our ultimate liberation.
So it's not just about romantic love, but a more expansive kind of love that encompasses everything.
Exactly. It's a way of being, a way of perceiving the world that goes beyond fear, judgment, and separation.
That sounds beautiful, but is it really attainable in a world that often seems so full of fear and division?
Well, Hawkins acknowledges that accessing true love can be challenging, especially when we've been hurt or betrayed. We might build walls around our hearts, struggle to love ourselves, or doubt that we're even worthy of love.
I think many of us can relate to that.
Absolutely. But Hawkins assures us that love is our inherent nature, always available to us, even in the darkest of times. He suggests that through forgiveness, releasing resentment, and cultivating gratitude and compassion, we can open our hearts to the transformative power of love.
So it's a practice, a journey of opening our hearts more and more.
Exactly. And the key part of that journey is taking personal responsibility for our lives.
That makes sense. It's easy to blame others for our problems or expect someone else to fix us, but ultimately we have the power to choose our thoughts, our beliefs, and our actions.
Precisely. Hawkins reminds us that we're not victims of our circumstances. We're creators of our reality. By shifting our focus from what's wrong with the world to what we can do to make a positive difference, we tap into a greater sense of agency and empowerment.
It's about becoming active participants in our own lives, rather than passive observers.
Exactly. And this leads us to another key concept: surrender.
Surrender. Isn't that like giving up? We were just talking about taking responsibility.
I know, it might seem counterintuitive, but Hawkins suggests that true freedom comes from letting go of that need to control everything and surrendering to a higher power, or the wisdom of the universe. It's about recognizing that there's a greater force at work, a divine intelligence orchestrating the unfolding of our lives.
So it's about trusting that there's a bigger picture, even when we can't see it.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a river. When we try to swim against the current, we expend a lot of energy and make very little progress. But when we surrender to the flow of the river, we effortlessly move downstream, guided by the natural forces.
That's a beautiful metaphor. So it's about letting go of our resistance and allowing life to unfold naturally.
Precisely. And along with surrender, Hawkins emphasizes the importance of living in the present moment.
That's another one that's easier said than done. Our minds are constantly jumping between the past and the future.
You're right, it's a practice. But Hawkins reminds us that the present moment is the only moment we truly have. The past is gone, the future is uncertain, and it's only in the now that we can truly experience life.
So how do we actually stop our minds from wandering and stay present?
He encourages us to practice mindfulness, paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the present moment without judgment.
That sounds a lot like meditation.
It is. And he also suggests that letting go of past hurts and future worries frees us to experience the present more fully.
It's like clearing out the mental clutter to make space for peace and joy.
Exactly. And speaking of joy, there's another inspiring aspect of Hawkins' work: his belief in the inherent goodness of humanity.
That's a powerful belief, especially considering all the darkness we see in the world.
It is. But Hawkins suggests that despite all the suffering, there's a spark of divinity within each of us. Even the most troubled individuals have the potential for transformation and redemption.
So it's about choosing to see the good in others, even when it's difficult.
Exactly. He encourages us to extend compassion and understanding to everyone, recognizing that we're all connected on a deeper level.
That's a beautiful vision, but is it really realistic? I mean, there are some people who just seem to choose darkness over light.
Hawkins acknowledges that this can be a challenging perspective, especially when we've been hurt. It's natural to feel anger and resentment, but he suggests that those emotions ultimately keep us trapped in a cycle of suffering.
So it's about choosing forgiveness and compassion, not just for the benefit of others, but for our own peace of mind as well.
Exactly. And we've talked a lot about internal work, but Hawkins also recognizes that we live in an external world. And he offers insights into how we can approach our work and careers in a more fulfilling and meaningful way.
I think a lot of people struggle with finding work that feels both purposeful and practical.
It's true. We often think of work as just a way to pay the bills. But Hawkins suggests that work can actually be a source of joy, fulfillment, and even spiritual growth when it aligns with our passions, values, and those unique gifts we all have.
So it's about finding a way to connect our work with something that feels personally meaningful.
Exactly. He uses the example of a musician stuck in a dead-end job. They might feel unfulfilled and resentful, but deep down, they long to share their music with the world. Hawkins encourages them to find ways to incorporate their passion into their lives, even if it's just in their spare time.
So it's not always about quitting your job and pursuing your dreams overnight. It's about finding ways to nurture those passions and see where they lead.
Precisely. And no matter what your profession is, Hawkins talks about the importance of bringing your values and integrity into your work. When we operate from a place of honesty, fairness, and respect for others, we create a much more positive work environment for everyone.
It's about aligning our actions with our values, both in our personal and professional lives.
Exactly. And this leads us to another crucial point: navigating the duality and conflict that seems so prevalent in the world today.
It's definitely easy to get caught up in all the polarization and division we see all around us.
You're right. It's everywhere: politics, social media, even our personal relationships. But Hawkins, he encourages us to try and transcend this duality.
But how do we do that when it feels like everyone's choosing sides and digging in their heels?
He suggests that by cultivating a higher perspective, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of all things and the inherent worthiness of all beings, we can begin to heal those divisions that separate us.
So it's about looking beyond the surface differences and recognizing our shared humanity.
Exactly. And this involves practicing tolerance, compassion, and understanding, even toward those with whom we disagree.
That can be really tough, especially when we feel strongly about something, but I can see how choosing to see the good in others, even those who hold different beliefs, could be incredibly powerful.
It is. And it all ties back to the importance of spiritual practice, those practices that connect us with our inner selves and with the divine.
I think a lot of people are searching for that kind of connection, especially in these uncertain times.
You're absolutely right. Hawkins talks about the importance of meditation, prayer, contemplation, and spending time in nature as ways to quiet the mind, open the heart, and connect with a higher power.
It's about finding ways to nourish our souls and tap into that deeper sense of peace and purpose.
Exactly. And the path doesn't have to look the same for everyone, whether it's through traditional religions, Eastern philosophies, or more eclectic spiritual practices. The key is to find what resonates with you, what nourishes your soul and helps you connect with the divine.
It's about finding what works for you and committing to the journey.
Precisely. And that journey, as Hawkins reminds us, includes aging and the inevitability of death.
That's definitely something a lot of people try to avoid thinking about.
It's understandable. But Hawkins approaches those topics with such grace and wisdom. He suggests that aging and death are not to be feared, but rather seen as natural parts of the human experience. He encourages us to embrace the wisdom and perspective that come with getting older, to appreciate how precious life is, and to let go of those attachments to youth and vitality.
So it's about shifting our perspective from fear to acceptance and living each day to the fullest.
Exactly. And while facing our own mortality can bring up a lot of difficult emotions, he encourages us to approach this process with courage, honesty, and a willingness to surrender to the unknown.
It sounds like a really profound process of letting go.
It is. And Hawkins' own story of transformation, it makes his teachings even more powerful.
You mean his struggles with addiction and depression?
Yeah, exactly. He shares so openly about those challenges and how he ultimately found healing through letting go. It's a reminder that no matter how lost or broken we might feel, there's always a path to wholeness and healing.
It's inspiring to know that even someone who has achieved such incredible spiritual insight also faced his own darkness, It makes his teachings feel more relatable and attainable.
Exactly. And he doesn't present himself as some kind of guru or savior, but as a fellow traveler who's just sharing what he's learned along the way.
His vulnerability and authenticity definitely come through in his writing.
They do. And it's not just personal stories. Hawkins draws on a wide range of sources to back up his teachings. He references spiritual traditions from around the world, psychological theories, scientific research, even his own clinical experience as a psychiatrist.
He really seems to weave together all these different perspectives to create this really comprehensive understanding of what it means to be human.
He really does. And amidst all these concepts, he always emphasizes the importance of taking action. Understanding the principles is great, but true transformation requires putting them into practice in our daily lives.
So it's about taking those small steps, experimenting with different techniques, and finding what works for us.
Exactly. And it's not a one-time fix, but an ongoing process. Hawkins reminds us to be patient and compassionate with ourselves along the way.
It's about recognizing that change takes time and effort, and that setbacks are just a natural part of the process.
Precisely. And while letting go is very much a personal journey, Hawkins suggests that it can also have a ripple effect, creating a more peaceful and harmonious world. As more and more people cultivate love, compassion, and forgiveness, we could transform our communities and ultimately the world.
So it's about recognizing that our individual choices have the power to create a collective shift toward a more loving and peaceful way of being.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the ego, that part of us that often gets in the way of letting go.
Right, the ego with all its needs for control, validation, and separation.
Exactly. Hawkins suggests that the ego is often the source of our suffering, telling us we're not good enough, that we need to constantly strive for more, and that we're separate from everyone else.
So how do we deal with the ego? It seems like such a powerful force in our lives.
Hawkins encourages us to become more aware of our egos, to observe those patterns, and ultimately to transcend their limitations. By letting go of ego-driven desires and our need for control, we can access a deeper sense of peace, freedom, and interconnectedness.
So it's about recognizing that our true nature isn't separate from the divine, that we're all part of something larger than ourselves.
Precisely. He uses the analogy of a wave in the ocean. The wave might think it's separate, but it's really just part of the vast ocean. Similarly, our egos might lead us to believe we're separate individuals, but we're all interconnected, part of the same universal consciousness.
That's a beautiful image.
It is. And while transcending the ego can be a challenging journey, Hawkins assures us that the rewards are worth it. By letting go of our egos, we can experience profound liberation, peace, and connection with the divine.
It's a reminder that our true nature is love, and that we have the power to choose love over fear.
Exactly. And that choice, it's reflected in our intentions. Hawkins emphasizes the power of intention, suggesting that our thoughts, beliefs, and desires actually shape our reality.
So it's not just about positive thinking, but about aligning our intentions with our highest good and taking action toward our goals.
Exactly. And speaking of letting go, Hawkins also encourages us to examine our attachments. Those things we cling to, whether they're material possessions, relationships, beliefs, or even our identities.
I think we all have things we're attached to, things we're afraid to let go of, even if they're not good for us anymore.
It's true. But Hawkins suggests that those attachments can actually be a source of suffering, creating dependence, fear of loss, and resistance to change.
So how do we let go of those attachments, especially when they feel so important to us?
He encourages us to ask ourselves, are these attachments truly serving us, or are they holding us back? And he reminds us that by releasing our grip on these things, we create space for new possibilities, greater freedom, and a deeper connection with the divine.
It's about trusting that something better is waiting for us on the other side of letting go.
Exactly. And while letting go of attachments can be challenging, Hawkins reminds us that it's ultimately liberating. We free ourselves from the weight of those attachments and open ourselves up to a greater flow of abundance, joy, and love.
So it's about choosing to trust the process and embrace the unknown.
Precisely. And that trust is essential, as letting go isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery and liberation.
It's a lifelong practice of becoming more aware of our patterns, making conscious choices, and continually choosing to let go of what's no longer serving us.
Exactly. And Hawkins offers so much practical guidance on how to do just that. He provides all these techniques for cultivating positive emotions, fostering healthy relationships, and creating a more fulfilling life.
So it's not just theory, it's about putting those principles into practice in our everyday lives.
Precisely. And one of those practices is cultivating a sense of gratitude.
Gratitude. I think that's something that's often overlooked. It's so easy to get caught up in what's wrong with our lives, what we lack, or how we compare to others.
You're absolutely right. But Hawkins reminds us that there's always something to be grateful for, no matter what's going on.
It's about shifting our focus from what's missing to what we already have.
Exactly. And by appreciating those simple blessings and expressing gratitude for the people and experiences that enrich our lives, we can shift from a perspective of scarcity to one of abundance.
So gratitude is about opening ourselves up to the good that's already present in our lives.
Precisely. And when we approach life from a place of gratitude, we open ourselves to a greater flow of joy, love, and fulfillment.
It's like we're training our minds to see the beauty and abundance that's all around us.
Exactly. And Hawkins encourages us to make gratitude a daily habit, even if it's just finding one small thing to be thankful for each day.
I can see how that shift in perspective could have a ripple effect, not just on our own lives, but also on the lives of those around us.
Absolutely. And speaking of ripple effects, Hawkins also talks about the importance of service to others. He suggests that true fulfillment comes not from focusing only on our own needs and desires, but from contributing to the well-being of others.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and finding ways to make a positive difference in the world.
Precisely. And it doesn't have to be about grand gestures. Hawkins suggests that even small acts of kindness, compassion, and generosity can have a profound impact.
So it's about finding ways to use our unique gifts and talents to serve others, whether it's through our work, our relationships, or our involvement in our communities.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes the importance of aligning our service with our passions and purpose. When we find a way to serve that feels authentic and meaningful to us, it becomes a source of joy and fulfillment rather than an obligation.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to do things we don't enjoy, but about finding ways to express our passions in a way that also benefits others.
Exactly. And as we integrate these teachings into our life, we start to see the world differently. We embrace the beauty of diversity and recognize the potential for growth and transformation in everyone we meet.
It's about shifting from a place of judgment and separation to one of understanding and connection.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Hawkins reminds us that this journey isn't about achieving some perfect state of being, but about continuously striving to embody love, compassion, and wisdom in our thoughts, words, and actions.
It's about embracing the process of letting go, recognizing that it's a lifelong practice of growth and transformation.
Exactly. And as we continue on this journey, we discover that true freedom and fulfillment lie not in clinging to the things of this world, but in surrendering to that divine flow of the universe, trusting that we are always guided, supported, and loved.
What an incredible journey. Hawkins' teachings really offer a roadmap for navigating life's challenges and creating a more peaceful, joyful, and meaningful experience for ourselves and for everyone around us.
I couldn't agree more. His insights into letting go are profound and practical, encouraging us to really step into our full potential and create a life that's truly aligned with our hearts.
It's all about choosing love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, and embracing the journey of becoming our most authentic selves.
It really is, yeah. And one thing that stood out to me as we were going through all these excerpts from Let It Go is how Hawkins' teachings, they offer a guide not just for us to change personally, but also for creating a more peaceful, a more loving world out there.
It's a pretty powerful message, especially now when there's so much fear and division and just like uncertainty everywhere you look.
Absolutely. But Hawkins, he reminds us we have a choice. We can choose love over fear, forgiveness instead of holding on to resentment, joy instead of despair. He wants us to focus on what we can control: our own thoughts, our feelings, our actions, and let go of all that stuff we can't.
So it's about realizing that power we have inside and then using it to create something better, both for ourselves and for everyone else around us.
Exactly. And he's not just talking. He gives us real tools, techniques we can use to cultivate more peace, more joy, more fulfillment in our lives.
It's been amazing diving into all this with you. Out of everything and letting go, what's the most valuable thing you're taking away from it?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's that reminder that true happiness, true fulfillment, it comes from inside. When we let go of all that fear, those limiting beliefs, those negative emotions that weigh us down, that's when we can tap into that source of peace and love that's already there inside each of us.
I love that. And I think it's a message we all need to hear right now. So to everyone listening out there, we have one final question for you. If you could let go of one negative emotion that's been holding you back, what would it be? And what could become possible in your life if you did? Remember, the power to choose freedom, to create the life you truly want, it's all within you. Start by letting go of what no longer serves you and see what happens. Thanks for joining us on another deep dive.